Hello to everyone and welcome. I'm Lisa Abramowicz of Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television, and I have a panel here that is possibly the 2020 and 2021 panel that is the most important for everyone to listen to. It has to do with logistics and the new developments and the new issues that have been facing this area as everyone shops online and as everything moves into products and stuff and away from services during the pandemic. With us to our far right, we have Lior Ron. He is the head of Uber Freight. Uber Freight is one of the largest freight companies, the largest digital freight company and the fastest growing freight company in the United States, helping to attract everything that we own and that we buy. Luke Petherbridge is CEO of Link Logistics, which is one of the biggest owners of U.S. warehouses and frankly warehouses in the world, and warehouses, as everyone knows, has become an incredibly hot commodity in the pandemic era. For both of you, I want to start with this idea of how the pandemic has transformed and challenged the logistics industry in ways that perhaps had already been started ahead of the pandemic, but got accelerated massively. And Lior, why don't we start with you in terms of some of the biggest shifts that you've seen in the past 12 months?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Lisa. The past 12 months has really been the perfect storm for logistics across the US and globally. If we zoom out, the main changes we are all, as consumers, have moved from consuming services to consuming goods, and we're ordering more and more stuff to our home. And as a result, there's always a truck behind that. We've witnessed the largest demand for truck services in the history of the US, with over almost 100% growth year over year for the total market. So on one hand, you have the highest demand ever. On the other hand, being a truck driver on the road is dangerous. Those are the folks that are moving the US economy, but they're exposed to the pandemic and they're exposed to a lot of varying conditions. So on the other hand, we have the lowest supply of truck driving jobs ever witnessed in the United States. And then finally, the way logistics is done is fully transforming, where this is a very manual industry with a lot of people in the field, but now everybody's remote, working from home, both us and our shippers. So everything is changing around us.
Okay, that's a great overview. We will dig into a lot of those points. Luke, what about from your perspective with warehouses and just where they are located and how they are used by retailers and other companies?
Yeah, and so Lisa, thank you very much for having me. And following on from Lior and almost your introduction, it really has been, everything, the challenges that we've seen throughout the country, it really has been a lot of people are at home and now buying a lot of stuff online. So that has really been a driving force between the explosion of e-commerce and online shopping, both with just traditional online providers, but then also traditional retailers. We've seen a lot of demand for our warehouse space throughout the country from traditional retailers. And when we really look at where these warehouses are meant to be located, I don't think in any world we believe things will have to be delivered slower to the consumer. If anything, and Lisa, we were talking about it, the number of Amazon trucks or FedEx trucks or UPS trucks that come past your door every day continues to accelerate. So do the number of boxes. It's really the location of those goods to be able to provide it to you. So it's that last mile warehouse, as warehouses get closer to the population, to be able to deliver those goods on behalf of retailers and providers as quickly as possible.
So Luke, in other words, you're seeing retail space, or rather warehouse space, increasingly in demand that's, say, 20 miles away from a city, 30 miles away from a city, and perhaps not as much in the middle of nowhere, or it's everything?
It's probably a little bit of both, honestly, but we are seeing a significant acceleration of that last mile warehouse space. So the stuff that is 20 to 30 miles away, infill, closer to the consumer, and it's really driven by consumer patterns, honestly. If you think about it, 10 to 15 years ago, we all shopped in stores, and it's slowly migrated to a lot more of the store now is on your phone, and particularly in the last 12 months where that's the only way you could have got stuff, and the ability to be able to deliver those goods in a timely manner, and timely is now days, not multiple days, it's hours and days, really has forced suppliers and e-commerce providers to get as close to the consumer as possible. So for Link, we've amassed over 400 million square feet of industrial space or warehouses, and we've really tried to focus on that last mile or that infill location, because we believe that is where the puck is going to move, particularly for suppliers and the network of supply chain warehouses for retailers.
And of course, the stuff has to get to the last mile to get them there. And Lior, I know that's where Uber Freight focuses most of its attention on. And we've talked about kinks in the system. You talked about a shortage of drivers. And previously, you and I were talking about that some 30% of US trucks are often empty, even though there is so much demand for their use. Can you explain about some of the inefficiencies in the system, how they are being ironed out, and also other kinks and challenges, both during the pandemic and otherwise?
Absolutely. The US logistics ecosystem, by definition, is sub-optimized and has a lot of basically pockets of non-knowledge, because it's very hard for shippers to actually know where the trucks are going to, where they're going back, and it's very hard to optimize that at a scale. That has been accelerated by COVID with so much volatility, to Luke's point, on warehouses changes, on the shape of the supply chain changing, on warehouses being closed and open because of COVID concerns. So all of that amounts to a lot of inefficiency. It amounts to 30% of miles being driven on highways around us are driven with empty trucks. And the opportunity there is really to drive efficiency by transparency and equipping the entire supply chain with visibility through digital tools, whether it's providing all the truck drivers with an app so they can actually better plan their daily and weekly route, or it's providing shippers with full visibility on what's going on. And like any industry, and we've seen the transformation with the taxi industry, with houses, every industry that is connected, and now everything is transparent and connected to the network, things become more and more of a data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence problem. And that's what we've done. Now we can optimize the entire network and greatly reduce all of those inefficiencies by better planning those routes, by better bundling routes together, by better planning those empty miles. And as a result, we can optimize, cut the costs for both sides, and greatly help the environment with that challenge.
I got to say, it's somewhat shocking to me that this wasn't done earlier, and it raises a lot of questions about technological investment. Are you seeing this sort of as being the last nail in the coffin in terms of pushing companies over the edge into having to invest perhaps in technological infrastructure that they hadn't before, Lior?
Yes. Logistics has been the last frontier for technology, and even if before COVID this was an option and maybe a nice to have, it's a necessity now. Shippers don't know what's happening on the road. Things are changing on a daily basis. The cost is extremely volatile, either up in the last few months or down in March, April, May last year. And it's becoming now a necessity for shippers, for Fortune 100, or even for small businesses to tap into that digital infrastructure. And we've seen great acceleration of digital adoption, both on the demand side with shipping and shippers, and the supply side with truck drivers and fleets. It's now becoming essentially table stakes if you want to run a modern supply chain organization.
So Luke, when Lior talks about pockets of non-knowledge, can you talk a little bit from your angle, the pockets of non-knowledge, which I love that phrase, by the way, and some of the technological solutions that are increasingly being implemented?
Yeah, I think Lior makes a great point. I think you're seeing enormous investment, both from landlords with smart buildings and then also retailers or just shippers. Because if you really think about the supply chain, what we're all trying to solve is optimize the end-to-end and make it as efficient and costless as possible. So we're seeing significant amount of investment. You know, you look at those that were leading the charge, whether it's huge e-commerce providers like Amazon or Home Depot, Walmart, and Target have spent billions of dollars on their supply chain. And then when you think about landlords, we're all sort of trying to lean in on the technology to make smart buildings. How can you make them more energy efficient, more efficient for the user, use large information sources to make sure that we're providing the services that they need. And then finally, you're actually seeing inside the space, particularly around the fresh produce and grocery, you're seeing robotics being used in an increasing way, whether it's Ocado with Kroger has a very large partnership and they have a facility in Cincinnati, or then more so, you're seeing up and down the East Coast the proliferation of Takeoff, the automated technology that can actually increase shipping. Because if you think about one of the issues all retailers have is they don't want to use their existing floor space that disrupts their existing customer. It's really trying to automate and optimize the space that they've already got. So the amount of investment currently is accelerating, and I think you're going to see that continue to accelerate over the coming years.
Luke, as you talk, I'm picturing this futuristic world where there are robots in warehouses that are doing the heavy lifting, quite literally. Is that what we're looking at?
I think you're going to see some of it. I don't think you're going to see I don't think you're going to start moving forward that everything's robotic. But if you look at the Ocado facility, it does do a significant amount of that packing and picking to make it easier. And it really does optimize the overall supply chain and also make the throughput of these buildings that actually have the investment. And that's really an area that, large landlords have really been focused on with their customers. How do you optimize the building and make sure it is as efficient as possible? So I do think you're going to see continual investment inside the space, and then also from landlords to make it more energy efficient. I think that is something you're going to see a significant amount of work around as well.
Lior, from your point of view, I know in 2016 you co-founded a self-driving truck company that was later acquired by Uber called Otto. And I'm wondering how much self-driven trucks will be the wave of the future, another sort of efficiency to remove to the system.
I do think if you zoom out and just think about what happened to supply chains over the last 12 months, the same way that IT became and digitization became a necessity, robots are slowly but surely moving to center stage, because when you have labor shortage, when it's very hard for you to keep the supply chain going with consistent labor supply, you tend to lean a bit more and open-minded a bit more on adopting robots, whether it's in warehouses or outside of warehouses in your supply chain. And specifically, self-driving trucks is still a big part of the future of this industry. The technology is not ready for prime time yet, but when it will be a big help, both in terms of the availability of track capacity and the optimization of the network. And while I think we're still in early innings on the commercialization of that, we have seen an acceleration in investment in the technology. There's a lot of fantastic teams, including Uber partnership with Aurora, that is really working in the space. And we'll definitely see more and more momentum and more open-mindedness by both shippers and regulators for that future.
As you both talk, I do think about the labor economy, and I do wonder, and this is sort of a bigger picture story, but given the fact that both of you have a very close on-the-ground look at the technologies and the investments being made right now in this industry, say in 5 years, do you have a sense of how many fewer employees will be needed to pack the boxes, to drive the trucks? And I think about this at a time when Amazon is becoming the second biggest employer out there, and that these are the jobs that are hot during the pandemic. Luke, what about you?
Yeah, look, I do think you're going to see there's some automation in the overall supply chain or shipping. However, I do think the overall pie of that business is going to continue to grow. Just think about all the people that you bought everything in a store prior to the pandemic. You are seeing overall consumption and e-commerce, although maybe not growing at the same rate, it'll continue to grow. So I think the overall pie continues to grow. And I think the overall requirement for warehouse space for shippers and for employees will continue to probably grow with that over the coming decade.
Lior?
Yeah, I'm optimistic on the labor prospects. As Luke mentioned, the overall market is the main driver, and the overall market, the logistics market, is continue to grow, and I think will continue to grow even after COVID subsides, because folks have changed their consumption patterns, and the shape of and the needs of supply chains have changed. They're not coming back. And as such, there's need for more and more labor, either it's in warehouses or in delivery jobs or in truck driving, in whatnot. Automation will play a role, but I think at least for the foreseeable future, it will be a complementary role, and we'll see some of the nature of the jobs change. We'll see more and more environment where automation, robots, and humans are working alongside each other. But overall labor, I think if you look at a 5-year horizon, I think we're actually going to see more than less.
Interesting. Well, talking about supply chains and making them more efficient and immune to some of the shocks that we've seen over the past year, there's a question about repatriating supply chains, getting things more in specific countries, which has been something people talk about, but what we actually are seeing might look a little different. Lior, do you want to start with that one?
Definitely, I think all the volatility that happened over the past 12 months really led to two mechanisms for shippers to cope with that unknown. One is to increase their inventory levels, and Luke can talk more about that, but we definitely see across the board that shippers are building more inventory, availability is paramount and top of mind, and with critical parts of the supply chain become more at risk, and having more unknown on all the components that goes into finished products, naturally shippers want to build more inventory. And as part of that, build that supply chain closer to home to reduce volatility. And the other type of volatility that happens is it's super hard to plan ahead. Logistics is an industry that is built on planning ahead. So we see more and more migration to on-demand, flexible arrangements, mechanisms, including IT systems that will allow shippers to respond within days for the changing landscape. So changes in both space and time from a shipper perspective.
Luke?
Yeah, I think everything Lior mentioned I agree with. I think you saw, particularly up till a year ago, everyone was working on-demand inventory, trying to keep inventory at a low and keeping it on demand. And there was really no major shock to supply chains for over a decade. And this clearly has exposed a significant number of risks, whether it be pandemic or other. So I do think you're starting to see inventory levels increase. And I think most people run at 15 days. You're starting to see it closer to 30 to 45 days of inventory. That clearly is just another demand driver for warehouse space or space inside the US. I think you're seeing a lot more closer to home to make sure it is within that last mile to be able to deliver due to consumer preferences. And I think on the margin, you will see some stuff being repatriated back to the US, but it's really that the low level of inventory we went into this pandemic, I don't think you're going to see post-pandemic. And I think we've all experienced it, walking into a grocery store and they're out of stock of an essential item. I mean, that is a significant problem or death for a retailer, and I think they're going to cure that with making sure they've got more inside the US now.
Luke, as a warehouse owner, I want to say congratulations, because this year, over the past 12 months, warehouse investments have been probably the hottest area in the real estate market as people try to invest in everything that you're talking about and the expansion there. And there's a question, though, at what point this actually makes things more expensive? And at what point we're going to start seeing conversions of malls and things like that that have become obsolete into warehouse space? What do you see in terms of the dominance of the warehouse footprint in the United States as it becomes more and more essential?
Yeah, and I think if you start with the overall market, you're seeing e-commerce going to continue to grow. So the amount of demand or requirement for warehouse, I'm still very, very optimistic about the robustness of demand there. You're seeing, as everything we just talked about, optimizing supply chain for existing retailers. So that's continual demand drive there. So the actual backdrop for our overall industry, I think, is still very strong. With regards to conversion of existing retail space, I think you will see that in small amounts. I don't think this is going to be a broad brush thing. And really because of, whether it's, co-tenancy issues, local municipality zoning restrictions, you will find few examples around the country, but I do think in the main, the industrial space will continue to grow and the demand will continue to outpace supply for the near term.
Lior, what about within freight logistics and sort of the technological investments? Where are the bulk of them going? Is it the artificial intelligence? How much is getting diverted to cybersecurity, especially based on the essential need of these services?
That's a great question. We see a lot of acceleration in investment. Where it's going? First and foremost, I think we're building part of that, building an infrastructure layer for logistics to bring all of this vast market from an offline first reality to an online first reality. So there's a lot of infrastructure, basic infrastructure that is needed to really bring the next wave of efficiency and automation. Putting an app with every truck driver, connecting those trucks to be smart trucks, so they're connected directly to the grid in a 4G or 5G way, being able to Luke's point, really understand what's happening in warehouses and investing in those systems. And there's a boiling the ocean on the infrastructure layer, digital infrastructure. I mean, we talk about an infrastructure bill and a need for infrastructure in transportation. There's an equal need for digital infrastructure that is now being put in place. So that's first and foremost. Then once you have that, we have all the added benefits that can come on top from artificial intelligence and machine learning, from very sophisticated way to automate operations, from integrating deeper and deeper into the ERP or IT stack of shippers. And if you zoom out, I think we're going to see the same transformation the IT industry have witnessed over the past 2 decades, where you have something that is mission critical, IT logistics. You have something that requires a lot of investment, IT logistics. You have something that is not your core forte, IT logistics, and the requirements are only getting more complicated. As such, I think we're sort of approaching a moment of sort of AWS for logistics, if you may, where a lot of those shippers we see are outsourcing more and more of their critical logistics needs to platform players like Luke on warehouses, like us on the trucking side, like other players, and that's definitely a trend that is accelerating.
Are you concerned at all about the larger infrastructure for 5G, et cetera, that could enable all of this? And I ask, as we're dealing with Google slowdowns and a whole host of other issues today, which are interrupting people's work from home situations.
Digitization always brings benefits and always also bring challenges. And you mentioned some. Once you digitize, then you are relying on mission critical for those systems to be up. You are relying, and we will see more and more cyber attacks on supply chains, on the system need to be fully secured. And for some needs, once you have a drone up in the sky, delivering stuff in real time, once you have a self-driving trucks, or even once you are having a connected grid, you are rely on a reliable US-wide communication infrastructure. So yeah, you need all of those, and that era will present challenges, but it will also present tremendous benefits that I think will outweigh that. And we all in an industry need to step up to the challenge and really make this infrastructure robust and reliable as much as possible.
Luke, we only have about a minute left, but there are so many people out there who are investing in warehouse space. I'm wondering, where is the hottest area that you see right now for warehouse investment?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, there's 3. There's the gateway markets that are the primary distribution hubs around the country. And you think on the West Coast near the ports, the East Coast near the ports, or the Southeast, you're seeing that last mile infill location really to solve the suppliers' real focus to be able to deliver goods the same day or the next day. And then the third one is these fast-growing cities that have great population growth. You're thinking Nashville and Austin. You're seeing great population, high-paying job growth, and that is obviously going to be the front runner to large consumption growth. So that's where we're seeing significant growth, not only in consumption, but then also users, and then rents in warehouse space as well.